This podcast contains content that is graphic in nature and mature language that may be unsuitable for children or young listeners. Listener discretion is advised. On New Year's Eve 1995, a shocking discovery rocked the Morehouse Parish community, and one family's lives was forever changed. A father who simply went to pick up his son found instead that his son was missing and his parents were shot dead. It took 4 weeks to locate the son and almost another month for the biggest shock of all to reveal itself. Join us today for a jolting case of greed and guilt where things aren't always what they seem on today's episode of Sin Law. Hello and welcome back. I'm Kelly.
I'm Peyton.
And that's not Kyler. That is my future forensic pathologist niece, and she's going to be joining me today on this case because she has been interested in true crime as long as she's been alive, and that's all thanks to
You.
me. Moi. That's me right here. My bad. I probably shouldn't have been showing an 8-year-old forensic files to sleep to, but we made it through. She's all the better for it, and that's where we are today. So I've told you a little bit about this case, but you don't know the majority of the specifics. You know a general outline. Mm-hmm. So basically what the people got in the title of this episode is the same information that you got. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get started right after a couple things. I just want to make a statement and put it out there to the universe that everything that I do on this podcast, I try to do with the utmost respect, and I try to do it in a way that isn't going to be offensive or hurtful to anyone. But if anything should ever occur, if anyone ever hears one of these episodes that it does affect in any way, please send me an email. Let me know. I'll be more than happy to change, edit, completely remove anything or any part of anything that may be upsetting to anyone. And that would be specifically involved in one of these cases. And because I've not so much enjoyed, but I am fascinated by these cases and want to share that with whoever wants to listen. So.
Yeah.
Woohoo! So, you ready to go, Peyton?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't believe you.
Oh.
All right. Bastrop, Louisiana, located in Morehouse Parish, which is northeast of Monroe, Louisiana. So the population was about 9,700 people in 2020. And Morehouse Parish has some pretty crappy history attached to its name. I'm not really going to get into it because I don't want that shit associated with my podcast. But it didn't help with the buyer's appeal, and neither did this case. So you'll see why.
Okay.
On December 31st of 1995, Mark Morris and his daughter arrived at Mark's parents' house. And it was a little bit after noon. And they were coming over to pick up Mark's son, 9-year-old Ryan Morris. Upon arrival, a few things seemed off when they were thinking about it later. They thought back and were like, oh yeah, that probably was something I should have noticed. But at the time, they just kind of wrote it off, no big deal. The garage door was open. There was a paper from Sunday, which I don't know what December 31st was. I'm not sure. I didn't look that part up. But it probably was either the day before or, it wasn't the same day as the day that they got there, and they wouldn't have had a paper on there.
Yeah.
Their doorstep for the 31st, because that's, New Year's Eve. Nobody does anything on New Year's Eve. Mm-hmm. So noticing these things, but not really noticing these things, they went ahead and went into the house. The daughter heard the phone ringing as soon as they walked in. So she walked in, picked up the phone, and someone asked to speak with her grandmother. And she was like, well, I don't know where she is, but give me just a second. I'll go see if I can find her. I don't know how old the daughter was. Yeah. I'm not sure. None of the information, none of the paperwork, or any of the articles that I got, I couldn't find her age. It just wasn't mentioned. So I'm not sure how old she was. But she put the phone down, and she went to go further into the house to try to find the grandmother. As she got to the grandparents' bedroom, she tried to open the door, realized she couldn't get it all the way open, could see through the crack that her grandparents were on the floor. And this is where I say I don't know what her age was, because instead of going back to her dad and saying, I think something's wrong, she goes back to her dad, Mark, and says, Mama and Papa are asleep on the floor.
So she's younger.
So she's got to be younger. That's in my mind. That's there's the first thought that comes to her head was, oh, they must be sleeping on the floor, not something's wrong. So she had to have been a younger age. Like I would say, probably younger than less than 9, more than 3.
Probably like
7-ish. That sounds about right. About that same age of innocence. So the daughter later recalled that when she told Mark that they were asleep on the floor, his eyes got really big, and he looked at her kind of crazy and then kind of freaked out. When he checked the parents or the grandparents in the bedroom, he realized immediately that they had been dead for some time, and both of them, the daughter and the dad, immediately started calling for Ryan, because at this point they found the 2 dead grandparents, but they still had not found the son that they had come there to pick up. So after yelling and getting no response, Dad finally decides to call the cops. So he calls 911. After calling 911, he calls his sister, who she said when she testified or when she gave a statement later that she hardly recognized his voice because he was so upset. Like, he was completely out of normal range. She said she just didn't hardly recognize him. After he got off the phone with her, he actually got in the truck and left the house to go to the neighbors to see if they had heard anything. And I'm guessing it was kind of like, well, have you heard anything? Have you seen Ryan? Do you know what happened?
Had he called the cops yet?
Yes, he called the cops first.
Oh, yeah.
Then he called his sister. And then after he got off the phone with his sister, I guess he went to go to the neighbors, maybe to check and see if that's where Ryan went.
Yeah.
And to see if they'd heard anything, because the parents were now both dead.
Okay.
So before he made it out of the driveway, though, he had another person, like, stopped him in the driveway, and he explained the situation, but he still went ahead and left and went to the neighbors and then came back. So he left the people that had driven up, that were in the driveway, and I'm not sure if they got out and started looking for Ryan or how that happened, but it seemed like a very chaotic crime scene just initially, because by the time the deputy got there, he noticed there were a bunch of people, neighbors, family, not just like close neighbors, but people that he had called. Like, his sister was already there. So after he came back, Mark came back from the neighbor's house, and he noticed the emergency people and his sister had arrived. So I don't know if he meant like the ambulance people, because it just said the emergency people. That was a quote.
Weird.
Yeah. So his quotes get worse, believe me. The deputy arrived on scene, noticed everybody. There was a shit ton of people there. Immediately after arriving, he was notified that the victims were inside. They were dead. And I guess that was from like the ambulance people, the ambulance team that had checked. And when the sheriff got on scene, he noted that Mark seemed kind of jovial, which is a weird, and that was just the quote from the documents, was jovial, and even remarked that he was glad to see the high sheriff on the job. Yeah, but he added, quote, "I don't think you're going to find anything. It looks like the perfect crime to me."
That is
unquote.
not suspicious at all.
No, totally not sus. No,
horrible.
No, it gets better, baby. Listen. And without any further provocation, like, the sheriff is just trying to make his way into the house as Mark is talking to him. That's the first thing he says to the sheriff. He's glad that the high sheriff's on the job, that it looks like the perfect crime to him. And then without the sheriff ever responding, still trying to get into the house, he says, even further, he says, quote, "You're going to find that they've been shot in the head at close range with a .22, unquote.
Whoa.
Not even made it into the house.
The little girl, blocking the bedroom door.
Right, but he went and checked after. He went and checked on him. He went and checked the bedroom before they went and hollered for Ryan, and then called 911, called the sister, then he left. But all of this has happened in pretty quick succession.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned it later that, you know, once they get there, they have to move the people out of the way of the door to be able to get into the room. Mm-hmm. So that begs the question, how did he know to tell the sheriff? We'll get there. Okay.
Yeah, that's...
So let's talk about not keeping your mouth shut, and we've talked about that before on other episodes, but at this point, the sheriff and the deputies are trying to secure the scene, trying to keep it a scene and not have all the people, but, you know, still got all the people that have showed up already. And on top of that, they still haven't found Ryan. After they tape off the area One officer ran into Mark Morris again, and Mark said, quote, "This is the biggest case to ever hit Morehouse Parish. This is going to put Morehouse Parish on the map," unquote. And he wasn't entirely wrong. A lot of these quotes come from people overhearing or things that people said he said to them, which in total circumstantial, like just from the first 3 things that he said to the sheriff were awful. But little things start piecing together, and they use a lot of this as a reason and motive and everything else later, because he also said, because he was excited, he sounded excited about this being the biggest case to ever hit this place. And then he also said that he would spend every cent of his inheritance money he would receive to find the culprit.
Every cent.
And this is all within a very short time of them finding the bodies, his son still being missing.
An hour and a half.
Maybe, if that long, because they're still taping. Like, this is after he taped off the area that they overheard him say something about Morehouse Parish being on the map. So they tape off the scene, they start working the scene. They found a footprint outside, which the forensic scientist Carolyn Booker took a cast of, and a cigarette butt was also found outside, but I didn't ever see anything that came of that. Remember, this is 95, so DNA was in its infancy at that point.
Yeah.
And the cast was never really mentioned again in anything that I could see. So that's just what they found outside.
Okay.
Now, once they went inside, they found the bodies of Lee and Louise, who went by Lou, both dead on their bedroom floor. They had gunshot wounds close range.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. Somebody said that earlier. I can't remember who. So Lee had been shot in the left eye, and Lou had been shot in the left temple. Oh. In the kitchen, they found a cooked pork chop on an uncovered dish on the counter. And in the hallway, they found one white sock, Lee's wallet, and his glasses. The glasses had one lens missing from the frame, and the wallet was later examined forensically, and they found 7 latent fingerprints, 3 of which were confirmed to be Mark Morris's, and they were on 3 business cards that were found inside the wallet. There was also a fingerprint recovered from the single dollar bill that was left in the wallet, and that was also Mark Morris's fingerprint. Mm-hmm. So the son's fingerprint is on 3 business cards and the dollar bill that was left in the wallet that was found in the hallway.
All up in that wallet.
Next to glasses, that one missing in the frame, and 1 white sock. Remember that.
Okay.
Meanwhile, law enforcement and friends and family amped up the search for Ryan, because at this point he's still missing. Still have no idea where this, I believe he's...
Do we have an age for him?
He's 9.
9?
He's 9 years old, and he is still missing.
Ooh.
So they are out looking, and while this is happening, Mark Morris couldn't find the time to STFU. He didn't know how. He couldn't figure it out. He said things like Ryan wouldn't be found alive, that his body would be found down the road near a bridge over water. A neighbor, it gets worse, a neighbor overheard him talking about the $100,000 reward he would give to anyone who could find the killer. And when others expressed concern that Ryan could be out in the woods getting cold, because this is December 31st, even in Louisiana, it gets cold.
It's kind of chilly, yeah.
So other people are like, oh my gosh, he's getting cold. It's getting later in the evening. And he's like, no, don't worry about that. He's fine. He's got his 49ers pajamas on and at least one sock. And at least one sock.
And at least one
and
sock.
At least one sock.
That's so bad.
Yes, it's not good. So later they heard about a sighting of a small redheaded child, which apparently, I'm guessing that Ryan was redheaded. It was never mentioned anyplace else, but I assumed because they made this mention that Ryan must have been redheaded. They saw there was a sighting of a small redheaded child in another parish, and when they mentioned this to Mark, he seemed completely just dismissive of the fact, because he swore his son was already dead. All this while that he's making all of these comments to everybody, he's never actually helping in the search for his son.
So he's never hands-on?
He's never hands-on. He's never going out in the woods. He's never taking and combing through the woods to see if he can find anything, any remnants, nothing. He's just standing around talking. And not only that, is he standing around talking, he's getting pissed off at the cops.
For looking for his son?
No, because they're giving him a hard time. Yeah.
Because they're suspicious.
He was overheard complaining the police were giving him a hard time, and, quote, if the dumb motherfuckers would look under the bridge, they would find Ryan, unquote. And if they didn't, it would take 7 damn years to get his inheritance.
Huh.
You see where this is going?
He's a little...
A lot dumb.
Yeah.
And in no way is he cunning. It just, all of these things, and he's saying all of this in front of everybody, out in the open, all at a time when he's just found his parents shot to death in his house. His 9-year-old son is missing, and he's more worried about them finding the body that they don't even know is actually a thing yet, or nobody's supposed to know. He's just missing.
Yeah.
Now he's worried about them not finding him for 7 years, and he might not get his inheritance if they don't. He's already apparently looked into the information, how long it takes that somebody is declared missing, how long it takes for them to be declared dead, and then you can get the money from that. Isn't that interesting?
He's just hiding in plain sight?
No, he's not even hiding.
Well, yeah, he's just in plain sight.
Yeah. So while the search for Ryan continued, law enforcement was also working on the murders of the 2 elderly Morrises. The sheriff stated that they investigated several hundred people, but they found nothing that they could, quote, put their teeth into. But pretty quickly, and for obvious reasons, as we've stated, Mark Morris, the son of the victims and the father of the missing boy, became their prime suspect.
I wonder why.
No idea. I couldn't tell you. I mean, like, there's no obvious reason. So, after getting multiple search warrants, they eventually found a .22 revolver tucked away in Mark's kitchen, and one .22 bullet that was unfired in the living room, like it had accidentally been dropped and forgotten. Later, the testing could not confirm that this was the weapon that killed the grandparents, but it couldn't be excluded either. And we've seen that before in other cases where they can't say for sure that it was, but they also can say for sure that it can't be excluded, which is kind of counterintuitive, I guess, but it makes sense. It's almost like the DNA. Like, we can't say for sure that it was him, but we can't exclude him either. So it's not a for sure, but it's not a complete miss.
Did they not...
For the weapon?
Well, yeah, because usually most guns have, like, the ridges on the inside of the actual barrel.
Yep.
That will be on the bullet, so could they not fire a...
They could, but it's a revolver. So the casings that would have been shot weren't left at the scene, and because it's a .22, the bullets are small, and .22, when they come into impact with anything, they shatter, basically, and there's almost nothing left to be able to be used to test against.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, because of the caliber,
Makes sense.
Yeah. So, they also found and tried to acquire a pair of Mark's muddy boots, but he protested and said, no, those are the only good shoes I have. So instead of, seizing evidence, they let him keep them.
As a primary suspect, you should not have let him.
They let him keep these boots. At least until about a month later, and by that time the shoes they had initially wanted to take as evidence had been thoroughly cleaned of anything useful, or that could have potentially been useful.
Wonder why.
No idea. Wonder why he wanted to keep those boots so damn bad. We're not making any assumptions, folks. So, in the weeks that followed, while police were still gathering evidence and investigating the double homicide, even bringing in the FBI to help process the scene and the evidence and things, the town of Bastrop was trying to remain vigilant and hopeful that they would find Ryan and find him alive, and they had completely covered the town in yellow ribbons to show their support, which I thought was really sweet.
That was very sweet.
Yeah. But trigger warning for anybody out there, this does involve the discussion of a juvenile. Sadly, on January 27th, 1996, so almost a full month after, because they found the bodies of the grandparents on the 31st. January 27th, they found 9-year-old Ryan Morris's body and a random teenager just happened upon him. He was half submerged in water under a bridge not more than 2.5 miles from his grandparents' house. And just as his father predicted, he was found wearing his 49ers pajamas and one sock. And he was dead from an apparent gunshot wound to the back of the head.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And after his son's body was found, they arrested Mark inside of a grocery store directly across from the grandparents' home, where he put up no resistance and didn't say anything, and he seemed to be in sort of a shock, which makes sense. The police then took him in for an interview, and at that point, it had taken 61 days for him to be arrested. Okay, so at this point, Mark Morris is under arrest for the murder of his parents and his son. they're basing the majority off of things that he said, or things that were overheard by other people, or things he straight up said to the sheriff that just didn't seem right. And the fact that he had, godlike knowledge almost.
Yeah, so definitely suspicious how much he knew.
For sure. But this is all just kind of circumstantial at this point, so the police have got to do something interesting with their interview.
What does he do? What is his job? Do we know?
I get into that a little bit later, but I don't know if he was actually working at this point. I don't think he had a job right now.
Okay.
But definitely wasn't in law or criminal anything.
Yeah, it's like there should be no reason he knows unless
he was in... Definitely not that. So, very interestingly, they bring him in and they're doing this investigation, right? And so he's technically under arrest. And they get him into the interview room and they say, okay, what would you say if we told you that we have a neighbor that says they saw the person who killed your parents and your son, and they did a composite with one of our sketch artists? What would you say if we showed that to you? And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And they showed it to him, and it was a composite sketch of someone who looked very similar to him. He's like, oh, I know why that looks like me. Somebody must have planned this out, and they look like me, and that's why the composite looks like me, is because they were trying to frame me for it.
Oh, yeah, totally just framing him.
That never happened. The composite never happened. The neighbor never happened. The eyewitness never happened. But he already had an explanation to come back and say, oh, no, yeah, that's why it looks like me, is because they were trying to frame me and say it was me.
Wild.
Yeah, absolutely wild. So they basically did this whole composite scheme just to see his reaction, and he gave them exactly what they wanted, as he had done before, without ever even being tricked into doing so. He gave them the motive, the location, details only the killer would know, like the size of the bullets, and the guy that he literally just never ever heard the phrase, like, take it to your grave, or even, like, nobody ever even told him, just, like, keep your trap shut. Like, that was not something that he knew. That, I guess he just didn't understand that he could stop talking.
Yeah, he didn't realize that he...
just no.
It disappoints me that he's...
Yeah, it's...
But it's a good thing that he wasn't.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm glad that most criminals are dumb. And I was talking to somebody about it the other day that, killing somebody takes a toll on you. Even if you are a hardened killer, it takes a toll on you. And so that's why you have these phrases like guilty knowledge or spontaneous utterances and things like that happen, because we're not equipped, like, mentally, and most people are not equipped. You have the outliers that are actual sociopaths, but most people are not equipped to be able to deal or function after they've taken a life.
Having that on your conscience must be like so...
It's heavy. It's heavy. Yeah. So, mostly due to his own mouth, he was indicted by a grand jury on February 29th. It was a leap year, because you'd only have the 29th. Okay, anyway. And that was on February 29th of 1996 on 3 counts of first-degree murder, and that was almost 2 full months, within a couple days of 2 full months after the gruesome murders. But the trial would have to wait almost 4 years before it ever even started.
Why?
We'll get to that in just a second, right after the break. All right, so we're back from the break, and we ended with talking about the indictment by the grand jury about 2 months after the murders, but then 4 years. He was arraigned way before that, but his trial didn't actually start for 4 years. So his arraignment was actually on March 26th of 1996, so about a month after he was indicted. He pled not guilty, and in July of the same year, he motioned for a change of venue, which this is really interesting. They motioned for a change of venue, and it was granted but not granted. So what they did, I know, right? It's weird. So they said, we're not going to change the location. We're just going to change where we get the jury pool from. So they kept it. The trial was supposedly was going to happen in Morehouse Parish, but the jury pool itself was going to come from St. Tammany, which is deep south down by New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And that's where they were going to get the jury pool from. Now, here comes the reason for the 4-year delay.
Okay.
His defense team requested a sanity commission hearing, which sanity commissions take forever because they have to go through the state. You have to get the qualified doctors. They have to come and they have to basically do an entire mental eval, which goes through all of the different things to make sure he's sane or competent, which it said sanity. So I'm betting they did both. I'm betting they did. Was he sane and was he able to stand trial, or was he able to, at the time of his crimes, was he sane? Was he able to say, I know this is wrong, and you know how that goes? Whether they knew what they were doing, knew that it was wrong, and all of those things, where they have to find out if he's sane, and then they have to find out if he's competent. And competence just means, can he help his attorney in his own defense?
Yeah.
So does he understand the charges? Is he able to help himself defend himself in court?
She was like all there.
Right, exactly. And then all of this time, it took almost 2 years to be found sane and competent. And then only then, after that, they ordered another sanity commission in 1998. So 6 months after the January filing and motion, they ordered a second commission. In June, 6 months later, he was found competent again. And after all of this, in October, we'll go ahead and change the venue. So not just the jury pool.
Odd.
Yeah.
I wonder if they were doing it just to make sure, or like just to buy time.
Well, I mean, a lot of the defenses, in most cases, they look for, first and foremost, the defense attorney wants to make sure that they are presenting the best, most fair defense that they can, because that's their job. That's what they are hired, and what, especially in cases of public defenders, that's what their job is specifically, is to make sure that they get a fair shake in regards to all of the possible motions that they can file. You know, you've got defense attorneys that will, even up to the very last moment after the jury comes in, they can say, before the jury announces they want to, dismiss all charges, and, just as a last ditch effort.
Yeah.
So that later when they come back and appeal, if they are found guilty, if they come back and appeal, they can say, no, we did everything we could. Ineffective assistance of counsel, it's not going to be valid. Even if they want to try to argue it, it's not going to come back and bite them in the butt.
Yeah.
So, which is every person's right to have a fair trial. Completely understandable. So, after all of this legal mumbo-jumbo, in October of 98, they say, okay, we'll change the venue, as well as the jury pool. So they moved to Morehouse Parish. I think I said that right. Which, anyway, there's a lot of parishes going on. It was in a different part of Louisiana that hadn't had as much press coverage on this case specifically.
Yeah.
So, finally, a year after that, in October of 1999, 4 years after the murders occurred, well, minus a couple months, jury selection finally began. Now, during this trial, the defense strategy was what other Dateline fans will know as, do you know what the Saudi defense is? I'm going to spell it because it's not how you think. On Dateline, it's always funny. Whenever they say it, they put it up on the TV and they spell it out. It's SODDI. Some other dude did it.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah. So, SODDI, some other dude did it. That's the defense that he was using in this trial. And Mark claims that the crimes occurred the evening of December 30th before the victims went to bed, and that was a time which he had an alibi, corroborated by multiple people, and I think they even had video of him somewhere in the time that he says it happened, or what his defense was claiming it happened. And this is where it gets kind of murky, because the time of death couldn't be determined exactly, because it hardly ever can.
Yeah.
Unless they are there, or unless someone witnesses it happening, if there's a pacemaker in somebody's heart, if they have a Fitbit, like all those cool things that we can... Decomposition, even with decomposition, though, it can't be exact.
True.
So the medical doctor who wrote the time of death on the death certificate admitted on the stand that it was a guesstimate, and that he couldn't be sure if the victims died on December 30th or the 31st. The forensic pathologist who performed the autopsies couldn't positively determine the time of death either, explaining it could only be a relative time of death, not a definitive. Again, like we said, if there's not an eyewitness, if there isn't some other cooperating evidence to say, they can't usually get it down within 6 to 8 hours or so, depending on temperatures and things like that, if they did or didn't get them from the autopsy.
Yeah.
So he explained that this was the forensic pathologist. He explained that in 2 different scenarios, they could use the stomach contents of only Lee had stomach contents. They couldn't get any from Lou. So he said that if it had been a large meal, and they could definitively prove that it was pork chops that Lee had eaten. So the pork chop on the counter kind of backed that up, that it was the last meal. But he couldn't tell if it was a large or a small meal, and that would have differentiated between the hours of the stomach contents being as much as they were or they weren't. So if it had been a larger meal, there would have been more left. If it was a smaller meal, there would have been less left. So depending on which size meal it was, change the times.
Yeah.
Okay. So he said the best guess is nothing more than the assumption that it was a large meal. It placed the time of death between 4 and 6 hours of them finding the bodies. Okay. So Lee and Lou's daughter, which would have been Mark's sister, testified that she could tell by the victim's clothing that they had not been to bed yet. They were very habitual. She knew their routines well enough to know. And a granddaughter said the same thing, or said something similar about their habits, and that the pork chop left on the counter never would have been left overnight. So it probably wasn't
too long
after that had happened. So they agreed that neither victim ever went to bed any later than 8 or 9, and sometimes they stayed up to watch the news at around 10, but that was at the latest that they ever were awake. Several witnesses testified that the house... So several witnesses testified that the house looked dark and empty around 8 to 8:30 the night of December 30th, and one of Ryan's friends actually spoke to him that night around 8 p.m., and Ryan was on the phone, and he said he heard something and said he'd be right back. When he came back to the phone, he abruptly said he had to go and hung up the phone. And when his friend tried to call back later, and then the next morning he tried to call him again, they never got an answer. And that was on December 30th. And the bodies were found December 31st around noon. Okay?
Okay.
So a close neighbor recalled hearing a popping. But remember, this is New Year's Eve. So...
fireworks.
There you go.
Especially out
in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. For sure. We don't have much else going on out here. So a close neighbor recalled hearing a popping racket and that's what they said, popping racket. I thought that was cute. Between 6:30 and 8 that night of the 30th, and it sounded like a small caliber weapon as opposed to fireworks. And this neighbor specifically stated that she had weapon, like she knew guns. She had a shotgun, a rifle, a pistol. She had all of these things. She knows what a gun sounds like. She knows what a firework sounds like. So we've got multiple witnesses that put Mark's car actually either right across the road at the store or at the victim's house, as well as testifying to as much. Now, Mark's alibi was something along the lines of going to a friend's house, watching a movie. They went to a local, little gas station casino, I think is what it sounded like. And he spent $5 that he said he didn't have, and then going back to the house with his friend, or going back to his house. And he said that all that could be corroborated, and it was. But the times at which that happened and the times at which the prosecution were alleging the murders happened didn't match up. So his alibi basically covered him for when he was trying to get everybody to believe it happened, but the prosecution was arguing, no, it happened but probably between 12:15 and 1:30 in the morning, or 1:30 and 7 a.m. the morning of New Year's Eve. So, which, because of the testimonies and things that I saw from the sisters and the granddaughter, it felt like to me that they were almost backing up his story, but at the same time, I don't know who they were testifying for or against. And I think it was hard to kind of, tighten in on... I had to put my phone down to be able to use my hands. To tighten in on this time of death thing, because it was so hard to be able to say one way, they didn't even have the science backing one way or the other.
Yeah.
So it was such a wide gap of time that it was hard for anybody to pinpoint it. But they were pretty sure of the time frame, just not exact, but they were able to say that it was definitely not in the time that he had an alibi in that window.
It's definitely not in that short amount.
Right. Well, for what he was saying, they knew it wasn't. They were pretty sure, within a reasonable amount of certainty, they were sure that it didn't happen in the time that he said he had an alibi.
Okay.
And the neighbor also testified on the stand that they saw Mark's car over there, and he had never mentioned being over there. So it was like gaps of his story were not matching up to what other people were testifying to have seen.
Yeah.
So, besides the fact that he had no good alibi for the possible murder times or the probable murder times, he had a damn good motive, other than the fact that he was omniscient of everything that had already happened in the body, where it was, and all of those things.
Could not shut up.
But we'll get to that in a second. The prosecution's case does not actually have to prove motive. That's not part of it. But it does tend to go over better with any jury that if you're trying to prove a case, giving the jury a motive, giving people the reason why something happened, always is a good thing.
Yeah, it always helps.
Always helps, because it's like a nice little bow on top. It makes it look pretty and, kind of fills out the whole design.
Makes it feel more there and, like, actually plausible.
Right. And so I bet you can't guess the motive in this one.
Let me guess. The inheritance?
Oh my gosh, you're right. How did you know? How did you even know he had an inheritance? We didn't even talked about that.
Nah.
Okay, so
just a hunch.
Mark Morris was terrified that his father was about to write him out of his inheritance, which he told a friend prior to the murders happening that was something in the $500,000 range that he was looking to inherit. Apparently, at this time, on January 1st, 1996, they had just passed an Inheritance Act that would go into effect January 1st, and that was the day after the bodies were found, by the way. Didn't know if you remember that or not. But this Inheritance Act actually would have benefited him because it made it to where the spouse only got control of, like, community property. They didn't actually, like, inherit it, but they could still, like, live on it. So I don't know if he just misunderstood or if he was just that dense that he didn't realize that this was helpful, but this was a good thing. And he had made it known, apparently, that the inheritance side was something that he was worried about, and then he was worried about this thing going into effect on January 1st.
I'm assuming they didn't have a very good relationship.
Well, and that's where we're not sure, because Lee and Lou were practically supporting him. I mean, they took care of him as well as his child, and Mark was on food stamps as well as getting money from his parents, but it had been kind of an issue up until that point that Lee was kind of getting tired of supporting his son, and
so he wasn't using the money for the reasons he was getting it.
That's right. And that was the thing, I mentioned the gambling earlier. That was a known issue.
Yeah.
He was not spending the money on things that he needed to just be spending it on, and he was kind of freeloading off of his parents. So it was reported that Lee was getting tired of supporting his son. And since they found the wallet that was empty, there was a fingerprint on the only $1 bill, and Lee had been known so he would come in the house, he would put all of his stuff like on the counter or whatever, but his wallet he would always take with him to the bedroom and leave on his bedside table, because he was known to carry hundreds and hundreds of dollars in his wallet at any given point in time. So the fact that it was found empty with Mark's fingerprints on it, which may or may not have been too crazy, but it was found empty except for $1 in the hallway
with a sock
and the glasses, it all kind of became pretty reasonable to assume that was the main motive. And now the motive that they presented at trial for killing his son was that of quieting a witness. So they really didn't have any other, I don't even know if you want to say reasonable.
Yeah, there was no other motive.
Yeah, and I don't like to say reasonable because there is no reasonable reason to kill to murder anyone, but specifically your 9-year-old son. But that was the only one that they could come up with, and that's what prosecution presented at trial, was that he killed his son out of motivation in keeping the only witness to the double homicide that he had already committed, keeping him quiet.
Yeah.
So Mark was worried he's about to be cut off, or that if he wasn't cut off, that the money wasn't going to go directly to him, that it was going to go to the grandkids and the great-grandkids. So he was more worried about not getting any money if something happened, which may have been another reason. Maybe I can't speak to anybody's motive for killing their own children, but that may have been part of the reason why he did that to his son, because he was worried that, you know, he might get some of the money instead of all of it come to him.
His daughter.
I can't
Was it
speak
just
to
because,
motive
like, the daughter wasn't with the grandparents that night?
I don't know. I couldn't. I can't even begin to imagine. Because I also, as I was researching this, in the back of my mind, I'm like, what kind of sick, twisted, sociopathic, whatever word you want to put on it, person sends their daughter into a house to find her grandparents dead that you just murdered. But then I remembered, it's the same kind of fucker that would kill his own son.
Yeah, he is the one who probably was like, "Oh yeah, go up to your grandparents' room.
Yeah, go ahead and go see if they're here." Yeah, and that's that.
She answered the call.
It hurts my heart. Yeah. So the biggest part for me in this whole thing, though, is one, his inability to keep his mouth shut, but two, like, how can you be so dumb? First of all, the first thing he says is, "This looks like the perfect crime to me."
Definitely
right?
not. His fingerprints are all found all over the place.
And not even that, but he is already trying to be like, "Oh, look how big and bad I am. Y'all are gonna figure this out." Like, and then saying things that are obviously guilty knowledge, like the size and the caliber of the bullet, the fact that they both were shot in the head, where they were gonna find the body,
close range,
like all of these things that nobody else should know. That it was just dumb. How could he have known all of these things unless he was the killer? That's basically what it comes down to. And not to mention the endless supply of comments that he makes about the inheritance. He'll give up all of this money if they can find the culprit. He'll spend all of his money to give a reward to whoever can give the information to find his son. Like, he made these statements in newspapers talking about he would give any amount of money to get his son. He'll give up all of the money to get his all of that. But once you go back and you actually listen, or you look at it and listen to the interviews and things, the police made mention of, every time he was talking about them, he always said those people, not his parents, not Lee or Lou. It was always those people.
He was disassociating himself from
Abso-freaking-lutely. And then he would always say that boy. He would never say his son's name. He would never. Yeah, it was that boy and those people.
Horrible.
Yeah, but that's another one of those things. Like you said, he was disassociating. That's something that they look for when they're interviewing people, because you don't want to face your own reality that you've taken the life of somebody that's personal to you. You're disassociating them, just like you said. It's perfect.
Just like when killers cover the face of their victims when they know them.
Absolutely the same thing. Yes, ma'am. They can't stand to look at what they've done. Yeah. Or have that person, quote unquote, looking at them after the fact. Yeah. And there is one specific witness testimony I want to mention, and only because I think it's the closest to a confession that Mark ever got. He did it in straight up OJ style. I didn't do it, but if I did, here's how it happened.
Oh.
And apparently Mark recounted to this witness that she testified at trial. He said this is the story of what he believed happened that night. And this is verbatim from the appeal. She recalled, quote, "He stated that a man knocked over a garbage can to make his parents and his son think that the dogs had done it. Then, possibly, his son went outside to chase the dog away when the man grabbed him. Holding a gun to his head, using him as leverage to back his father down the hall to the bedroom. He stated that he could see his father trying to shut his bedroom door, the man getting his hand wedged in it, and the gun going off. When his dad fell, he could picture his mother hollering his father's name and then being shot. She further remembered him stating that because the crime occurred close to New Year's, the man had waited to make sure that no one could distinguish the gunshot from a firecracker. Then he described the route which the man would have taken when he left the house, elaborating that after the man crossed the railroad tracks on Knapp Street, he looked into his rearview mirror and said, 'I've got away with this, I'm free. I've got away with this,' unquote."
Wild! That is...
Yeah.
I'm at a loss for words.
Yeah, and that's... when I read it, I was like, that is literally OJ. That is exactly what he did. Like, I didn't do it, but if I did, here's how I did it. And he was saying that man would have. But that is, it tenfolds my heartbreak for these victims and their family, because
was he
not
disguised?
only was...
Did they know?
I doubt it. The fact that he used this little boy as a leverage piece.
You know how heartbreaking it is to have your own dad come in.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. I don't want to think about it. It's too much. I can't. So after that testimony and all of the other testimony presented and the state's witness and then the defense, everything that went on, a trial that took 4 years to start, lasted 8 days. The jury convicted Mark Morris on all 3 counts of first-degree murder for the murders of Louise, and Ryan Morris. But they were not able to get a unanimous verdict because, remember, this is first-degree murder. He just got convicted of first-degree murder, so this is a capital case. So technically, Louisiana still has a death penalty. But you have to have a unanimous jury in the same way that you have to have a unanimous verdict for guilt. You have to have a unanimous verdict for death penalty. So they could not come to a unanimous decision. So in January 2000, the court sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences without benefits.
Good.
So, I mean, that's the mandatory. If they don't do death penalty, then it's a mandatory, but it doesn't have to run consecutive. That's just an extra penalty for, it's mind-blowing. But he did file for an appeal, and that's where I got a lot of the information for this episode. He filed an appeal, but on August 29th, 2001, the jury's verdict was affirmed. Mark Morris is still in prison to this day at Angola State Penitentiary. He is 67 years old at the time of this recording.
Wild. That's so sad.
Yeah. And I already made mention of the fact that I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that he sent his daughter in there to find her grandparents dead. But then I remembered, this is the same bastard that,
killed his own son.
Murdered his son. And then that's the biggest thing is that, for money?
Just for
money? I mean, I think there was another witness who testified that he saw him with a couple $100 or a couple $100 worth of money in his wallet the night after, or the same, the next evening or whatever. But I will never understand.
Especially when they were already going out of their way to help him. Absolutely.
They just seem like a pretty decent family. And then how jazzed up he got about how this was going to be the biggest case in Morehouse Parish. It's mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing. But thank you for joining me. Oh, and big shout out to Sierra. She gave me the information to dig into this case, and I was absolutely captivated, so I want to send a big shout out. Thank you, Sierra, for referring this case to me so that we could get it covered. Thank you, Peyton, for hanging out with me and muscling through all of our distractions and
of course,
and all of our different interruptions and pauses and unscheduled interruptions. So I look forward to doing another case with you, which hopefully we'll get to do soon. Mm-hmm. And I hope you guys keep listening. And if you have any questions, comments, remarks, you want to make any kind of case referral, any case that you can suggest, I am 100% open. All of the cases right now that I'm investigating have been referred to me in one way or another by someone who's either listened. And I just want to say thank you for all of the wonderful feedback from everybody. And we'll see you next time. Mm-hmm. Take care out there.
Bye. Be safe.
Make good choices.
This has been an Elf Audio production.